At exactly 8:04 on a chilly Tuesday morning, my debit card was declined over a 417-gallon of milk at the Kroger on East Main Street in Carmel, Indiana. I figured the card reader was acting up. Then I called my husband Mark, and he laughed before saying, "You're spending too much." 10 seconds later, his daughter took the phone and calmly added, "Ask permission before you spend another $1." I wish I could tell you I snapped back with something clever. I didn't. I just stood there holding that gallon of milk while the cashier waited. The young woman behind the register couldn't have been older than 25. She gave me the kind of sympathetic smile people wear when they're trying not to embarrass you. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Would you like me to try it one more time?" I nodded. She inserted the card again. Beep, declined. A man pushing a shopping cart shifted his weight behind me. Somewhere farther down the checkout lanes, a baby started crying. A little boy in line with his mother looked up at me and whispered, a little louder than he probably realized, "Mom, why doesn't her card work?" His mother quietly shushed him. I wanted the floor to open beneath me. Instead, I reached into my purse for my phone. Mark answered on the second ring. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Something's wrong with our debit card." There was a pause. Then he chuckled. Not a nervous laugh, not confusion, a real laugh. "Maybe it's about time." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you've been spending too much lately." I honestly thought I had misheard him. "Mark, I'm buying milk." "Well," he said, "it all adds up." Before I could answer, I heard another voice. "Ashley, Dad, let me." The phone shifted. Then she spoke like she was explaining something to a stubborn child. "Linda, from now on, ask permission before you spend another $1." Permission? I actually looked around to make sure I'd heard correctly. For a second, I couldn't even find words. Not because I was angry, because I was trying to understand how 17 years of marriage had somehow led to this moment. "I'm buying groceries," I finally managed. "We're protecting Dad," Ashley replied. "Somebody has to." The line went dead. I stared at the screen for another few seconds before lowering the phone. The cashier pretended not to notice my face. "Would you like me to put these aside?" she asked. I swallowed. "No." I opened the small hidden pocket behind my driver's license and pulled out the emergency $20 bill I'd carried for years. My father had taught me that trick when I was 16. Always keep enough cash to get yourself home. I'd never imagined I'd need it because of my own husband. "I'll just take the milk," I said quietly. I set the bananas and loaf of wheat bread aside. The total came to $4.17 plus tax. As I carried the bag to my car, the cold November wind hit my face harder than usual. I sat behind the steering wheel for almost a full minute without starting the engine. This couldn't be about money. It simply couldn't. Mark knew exactly how our finances worked. Or at least, I thought he did. When we married 17 years earlier, we'd both already lived full lives. We'd each buried a spouse. We'd each raised children. Neither of us was looking for another fairy tale. We just liked each other. Mark made me laugh. I made him feel calm. That had seemed enough. Over the years, I'd handled most of the paperwork because I'd spent 32 years as an HR director. Budgets, insurance, retirement planning. It all came naturally to me. Mark hated paperwork. He'd always say, "You handle the numbers, I'll handle fixing everything else." And for years, that's exactly what we did, until he retired. Something changed after that. It wasn't overnight, more like watching a crack spread across a windshield. Slowly, quietly. At first, he only asked more questions. How much did groceries cost this month? Why are utility bills higher? Do we really need to replace that dishwasher? Nothing unreasonable. Then Ashley began visiting more often. She'd recently moved back to Indianapolis after her divorce. She insisted she only wanted to help Dad stay organized. At first, I welcomed it. She organized filing cabinets, sorted mail, even offered to pay bills online. I thought she was trying to reconnect with her father. I never imagined she was quietly changing the way he saw me. I finally started the car. Home was only 12 minutes away. Instead of turning toward our subdivision, I drove straight through the next intersection, then another. Without really deciding, I found myself heading toward downtown Carmel. Rebecca Ellis's office sat on the second floor of a brick building across from the courthouse square. I'd known Rebecca almost 15 years. She'd handled my parents' estate planning after my mother passed. She looked up the moment I stepped inside. "Linda?" I forced a smile. It didn't fool her. She closed the folder she'd been reading. "What happened?" I sat down across from her desk. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Finally I whispered, "I think my husband just let his daughter decide what kind of wife I deserve to be." Rebecca didn't rush to fill the silence. She simply handed me a box of tissues. I didn't take one. Instead, I opened my leather portfolio and slid several folders onto her desk, checking account statements, property records, trust documents, investment summaries. Rebecca looked at the first page, then the second. Her eyebrows slowly lifted. She looked back at me. "Linda," her voice became very quiet, "whose money have they actually been trying to control?" I met her eyes. "I don't think Mark even knows." Rebecca turned another page, then another. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. For the first time that morning, someone wasn't looking at me with pity. She was looking at me with concern. And something else. Resolve. She folded her hands together and said, "Before we do anything else, I need you to tell me exactly what happened at that grocery store." I took a slow breath. For the first time since 8 o'clock, I felt like someone was finally listening. Rebecca listened without interrupting. I told her about the 2 declined swipes, Mark's laugh, and Ashley's voice coming through the phone like she had every right in the world to discipline me. I repeated the exact sentence. "Ask permission before you spend another $1." Rebecca took off her reading glasses and placed them on the desk. "Did Mark tell you beforehand that he was restricting your access?" "No." "Did you agree to it?" "No." "Did Ashley have your permission to manage any account in your name?" "Absolutely not." Rebecca nodded once, then opened the first folder I had brought. She had the habit of going very still when she was concentrating. Her eyes moved down the pages while one finger followed the account numbers. "This checking account is joint," she said. "Yes, household expenses." "And this savings account?" "Joint too, mostly property taxes and home repairs." She turned to the next statement. "But your pension deposits here." "My individual account." "And the brokerage account is solely yours?" "Yes." "The family trust?" "My parents established it before they died." She reached for the property record. "And you bought the house in 1998. 8 years before I met Mark." Rebecca looked up. "How much of Mark's money went toward the original purchase?" "None." "Major renovations?" "I paid for most of them. He did some of the work himself." She nodded and continued reading. The truth was, I had always been careful about documentation. 32 years in human resources will do that to you. You learn quickly that memories get selective when money or pride enters the room. Still, seeing my life reduced to folders made my stomach hurt. The house, the pension, the trust, the brokerage account. They weren't symbols of wealth to me. They were years, early mornings, missed lunches, caring for my parents while working full-time. Sitting at a kitchen table after my first husband died, trying to calculate whether I could keep the house alone. Rebecca closed one file. "Linda, they did not freeze everything. I know that now. They may not know that." I gave a dry little laugh. "No, I don't think they do." Rebecca leaned back. "Tell me about Mark's business." That caught me off guard. "What about it?" "You said he had financial trouble before retirement." I looked toward the window. Outside, a delivery driver was unloading boxes from a white van. Ordinary life kept moving while mine had stopped somewhere between the dairy aisle and this office. 5 years ago, 2 commercial clients didn't pay him, I said. One filed bankruptcy. The other dragged the invoice through court for almost a year. How much did he owe? Between suppliers, payroll taxes, and a line of credit, a little over $140,000. Rebecca's expression tightened. How did he resolve it? I looked down at my hands. I helped him. How much? Most of it. She waited. I used money from an investment account and refinanced a small portion against the house. We paid the IRS first, then his suppliers. I negotiated a reduced settlement on the credit line. Was that documented as a loan to him? No. Why not? Because he was my husband. The answer sounded foolish in a lawyer's office. Rebecca didn't criticize me. She just asked, "Did Ashley know?" "I don't think so. Mark didn't want anyone to know how bad things had gotten." That was the part I had protected most carefully. Mark had always been proud of his work. He could walk into a half-finished room and see what it would become. He knew framing, drywall, electrical codes, every supplier in central Indiana. Men called him when they needed advice. Then his business nearly failed. He stopped sleeping, lost 15 pounds, started checking the mailbox before I could get to it because he didn't want me seeing another notice. One night, I found him sitting in the garage with the lights off. "I can't fix this," he said. It was the first time I had ever heard him admit that. So I fixed what I could, not because he asked, because I loved him, and afterward, we never discussed it again. At the time, I thought that was kindness. Sitting in Rebecca's office, I began to wonder whether silence had allowed him to rewrite the story. "Retirement was hard on him," I said. "Harder than he admitted." Rebecca gestured for me to continue. "For years, everyone needed him, employees, customers, subcontractors. Then suddenly he was home by 10 in the morning with nowhere he had to be. At first, Mark attacked retirement like a home renovation. He cleaned the garage, rebuilt the deck stairs, organized every screw and nail into labeled bins. By the third month, the projects ran out. He started watching cable news until lunchtime. He gained weight around his middle and complained about his knees. Some mornings he stayed in the same flannel shirt until dinner. I tried to include him in financial decisions. That only seemed to make things worse. If I asked whether we should move money into a higher yield account, he heard, "You don't understand this." If I reminded him about an insurance deadline, he heard, "You can't handle anything anymore." Then Ashley moved back from Louisville after her divorce. At first, she came by for Sunday dinner. Then twice a week. Then almost every day. She knew exactly what to say to him. "Dad, you built a company from nothing." "Dad, you shouldn't have to ask Linda about your own money." "Dad, she acts like you're one of her employees." I heard pieces of those conversations from the kitchen. When I confronted Mark, he dismissed it. "She's worried about me. She's stirring up trouble. She's my daughter, Linda." That sentence ended every discussion. Rebecca reached for her legal pad. "How much debt does Ashley have?" "I don't know exactly. A lot." "Any evidence?" "She left a credit card statement on our counter 2 months ago. I wasn't snooping. It was open." "How much?" "Just over $26,000 on that card." Rebecca wrote something down. "She has others?" "At least 3, and a car she can't afford." "Has Mark given her money?" "Yes, small amounts, I thought. 500 here, 1,000 there." "From where?" I felt a cold pressure behind my ribs. "The household account." Rebecca's pen stopped. "How often?" "I don't know." She turned the laptop toward herself and began listing what we needed: complete statements, recent transfers, login changes, copies of any powers of attorney, beneficiary designations, and communication between Mark and Ashley. Then she said something that made the room feel smaller. "This may be more than a marital argument. Restricting access to shared funds, especially without notice, can be evidence of financial coercion. If Ashley is influencing transfers for her own benefit, we need to know immediately." I stared at her. "Are you saying she's stealing?" "I'm saying we don't guess. We document." That was Rebecca. Calm words, hard edges. We spent nearly 2 hours reviewing account structures. Mark and Ashley had managed to interfere with the joint household account and online access linked to it. They had not touched my pension, brokerage account, inherited trust, or the deed to the house. Rebecca allowed herself one small smile. "They've been guarding the bird feeder while you still own the whole farm." Under different circumstances, I might have laughed. Instead, I thought about the man I had found in the dark garage 5 years earlier. The man I had protected. The man who now thought I needed permission to buy milk. Rebecca drafted a list of immediate steps. Revoke Mark's authority over my individual accounts, update my estate plan, replace my healthcare proxy, document every transfer, and prepare separation papers without filing them until we understood the full picture. Nothing dramatic today, she said. No threats, no social media, no confrontation. I wasn't planning one. I know, that's why I'm saying it. By the time I left, the sky had turned gray. I drove home slowly, rehearsing what I might say to Mark. Then I opened the front door. 3 flattened moving boxes leaned against the hallway wall. More were stacked in the guest room. Ashley stood beside them with a black marker in her hand. She smiled as if we were planning a garage sale. "We're just getting ready," she said, "in case you decide to leave." Mark was sitting in the den. He heard her. He didn't say a word. That night, I lay awake beside him while he pretended to sleep. The red numbers on the clock moved from 1:17 to 2:03, then 3:26. On the dresser sat our wedding picture from 17 years earlier. Mark was thinner then. I had fewer lines around my eyes. We looked relieved more than romantic, like 2 people who had found safe ground after separate storms. I stared at that photograph and wondered whether I was about to destroy my family over a gallon of milk. Then I remembered Ashley's voice. Not the words themselves, the certainty behind them. And I understood something I had been avoiding. The milk had only shown me the door. They had been pushing me toward it for months. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I heard the checkout scanner beep, declined. Then Ashley's voice. "Ask permission." By 6:30 Wednesday morning, I was already dressed. Mark was in the kitchen pouring cereal. He glanced up when I walked in. "Morning." His voice sounded almost normal. Almost. I poured myself a cup of coffee without answering. He watched me for a moment. "Still upset?" I looked at him. "Are you?" He shrugged. "I think you're making this into something bigger than it is." "Bigger than what?" "The debit card." I set my mug down. It wasn't about the card. He sighed as though I were exhausting him. "Ashley and I have been talking." I nearly laughed. "I know. We're just trying to make sure we're careful with money now that I'm retired." Careful. That word bothered me more than I expected. We'd spent 17 years making financial decisions together. I'd never bought designer handbags, never collected expensive jewelry. Our vacations were usually weekend trips to Brown County or Michigan. I clipped coupons, compared insurance rates every year, packed leftovers for lunch. If anyone in that marriage had been careful with money, it had been me. I looked at Mark one last time. "I'm going out." He nodded without asking where. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. Rebecca's office had already prepared most of the paperwork. She'd emailed me a checklist the night before. Bring identification, bring property records, bring retirement statements, don't discuss legal matters with Mark, don't answer emotional text messages. Simple, methodical, exactly what I needed. By 10 o'clock, we were sitting inside the Carmel branch of Heritage Community Bank with Nancy Gomez, the branch manager Rebecca had known for years. Nancy was about my age, warm smile, gray streaks through dark hair. She spoke softly enough that nobody nearby could overhear. "Mrs. Harper," she said. Rebecca explained the situation generally. "Before we make any changes, I need to verify every instruction directly from you." She spent nearly 45 minutes reviewing documents. Nothing dramatic happened. No alarms, no security guards, just signatures, initials, identification, more signatures. We revoked every authorization I had voluntarily granted years earlier on my individual accounts. Nancy explained everything carefully. "These updates won't appear immediately." "I understand." "Our processing department usually finishes by tomorrow afternoon." "That's fine." Rebecca nodded approvingly. Everything about this process felt surprisingly ordinary. People imagine revenge as slammed doors and dramatic speeches. Real life is paperwork. Real life is waiting. Real life is signing your name 23 times while realizing your marriage is quietly ending. Instead of driving home, I went to my sister Carol's house in Fishers. Carol opened the front door before I even knocked. She took one look at my face. "Oh, honey." She wrapped both arms around me. For the first time since Tuesday morning, I cried. Not loudly. Just enough to let the pressure escape. Carol didn't ask questions until we were sitting with bowls of homemade vegetable soup. After listening quietly, she shook her head. I never liked how often Ashley was over there. I thought she was rebuilding her relationship with her dad. So did I. Carol reached across the table. What are you hoping happens? I stared into my soup. I don't know. That's not true, I sighed. I guess. I stopped. What? I keep hoping Mark will wake up. Carol smiled sadly. Sometimes people don't wake up until they lose something. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Mark. I stared at the screen. Rebecca had been very clear. Don't answer. The ringing stopped. Then another call, then another. Voicemail, then silence. I almost called back. My thumb hovered over the screen. Maybe he'd realized how cruel Tuesday had been. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Before I could decide, another message arrived. This one from Ashley. Dad's confused. Stop trying to scare him. I locked the phone. Confused? Mark hadn't sounded confused at Kroger. He'd sounded amused. Thursday morning felt strangely peaceful. Carol insisted we go for a walk out around Geist Reservoir. The leaves had already started turning brown. A cool breeze came off the water. For nearly an hour, neither of us talked about lawyers or banks. We talked about grandchildren. Retirement. Her tomatoes refusing to grow this year. Ordinary conversation. It reminded me that life was still happening outside my marriage. Around 3:30 that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca. They've processed everything. So it's done? The revocations are complete. I thanked her. Before I could put the phone away, another call appeared. Mark. Then another. Ashley. Then another. Mark. Voicemail notification. Text. Another call. Another voicemail. The phone vibrated so often it practically crawled across Carol's kitchen table. She looked at the screen. My goodness, I counted. 14 missed calls, then 22, then 30. The number kept climbing. By 5:15, there were 41 missed calls. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Carol asked, "What happened?" Before I could answer, Rebecca called again. This is exactly what I expected. What do you mean? Nobody at the bank told Mark anything confidential. So why? He tried accessing one of your investment accounts online. I stayed quiet. He couldn't, Rebecca continued. Then he attempted to transfer money using the home equity line you allowed him to access years ago. My stomach tightened. He couldn't reach that either. He called the bank? Several times. And? They simply confirmed his authorization had changed. Nothing more. No secrets. No private information. Just a very simple fact. The access he once had no longer existed. Rebecca lowered her voice. Linda. Yes? There's something else. I immediately heard it in her tone. Not panic. Urgency. What is it? She took a slow breath. One joint savings account slipped through our first review. The emergency account? Yes. About $38,000. Money we'd set aside over the years for unexpected home repairs and medical expenses. It's still jointly accessible. My pulse jumped. So Ashley, Rebecca finished the sentence, if she convinces Mark to empty it before we file additional protections, they legally can. The room suddenly felt much colder. Carol had been listening from across the table. She already knew from my face. Is it bad? I nodded slowly. Rebecca spoke one last sentence before hanging up. I've already started preparing the paperwork. Can we stop them? A pause. I honestly don't know. That evening, I watched the sun disappear behind Carol's backyard trees. 41 missed calls. None of them apologized. None asked how I was. Every voicemail began the same way. Linda, call me. Linda, we need to talk. Linda, answer your phone. Not one said, I'm sorry. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't trying to save my marriage anymore. Maybe I was trying to save myself. Just as I was about to silence the phone for the night, Rebecca texted, Be in my office at 8:30 tomorrow. We may still have one move left. I stared at the message, then at the dark screen reflecting my face. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Rebecca was already on her second cup of coffee when Carol and I walked into her office Friday morning. She didn't waste time. I filed for a temporary restraining order on the disputed savings account at 7:30. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So they can't empty it? Not without creating a much bigger legal problem for themselves. What if they already tried? Rebecca slid a printed document across the desk. They did. I stared at it. A transaction record from the previous evening. Attempted. Transfer, $35,000. Status, declined. Pending restriction. I closed my eyes. Mark had actually tried. Maybe Ashley had convinced him. Maybe he'd done it willingly. At that moment, I honestly didn't know which possibility hurt more. Rebecca spoke gently. I don't think this was about needing the money. No. It was about control. I nodded. For the first time in 3 days, I finally believed her. By lunchtime, my phone had gone strangely quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. The silence almost worried me more. Around 1 o'clock, Carol looked over from her kitchen table. Frank called. I looked up. Frank Donovan? She nodded. He still does that neighborhood cookout every November. I know. He wanted to make sure we're both coming tomorrow. I almost laughed. The last thing I need right now is a barbecue with Mark's friends. Carol smiled. I told him everything. You did what? He asked why you sounded upset earlier this week. And? I wasn't going to lie. I rubbed my forehead. Carol, he already knows more than you think. Saturday afternoon arrived cold but sunny. Frank's backyard looked almost exactly as it had every November for the past 15 years. Portable heaters, folding tables, homemade chili, college football playing quietly on an outdoor television. Normally, I loved these gatherings. This year, every step toward the backyard felt heavier. People noticed me immediately. Some hugged me, others gave uncomfortable smiles. A few looked away altogether. Ashley had clearly been busy. Within minutes, I began hearing pieces of conversations. Heard she's leaving Mark? Something about hiding money. Poor guy just retired. I kept smiling. Not because I felt happy, because I refused to defend myself before anyone had actually asked me a question. Frank greeted me with a warm hug. I'm glad you came. So am I. Although I wasn't completely sure that was true. About half an hour later, Mark arrived. Ashley climbed out of his truck first. She looked confident. Too confident, almost like she'd rehearsed something. Mark looked exhausted. He hadn't shaved. His shoulders seemed lower than I'd ever seen them. For one brief second, our eyes met. He looked away first. We'd barely finished eating when Ashley stood beside the picnic table holding a paper plate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The entire yard slowly grew quiet. I just think families should know the truth. Frank frowned. Ashley. No, really. She turned toward me. My dad spent his whole life working. Several people nodded politely. And now, she sighed dramatically, he's being abandoned because he's retired. I could actually hear Carol mutter, "Oh, Lord," Ashley continued. Linda froze him out financially. There it was, exactly the story she'd been telling everyone. My father can't even access his own money anymore. A few people exchanged uncomfortable looks. Someone asked quietly, "Is that true?" I opened my mouth. Frank spoke first. Wait. He looked genuinely confused. What money? Ashley blinked. What do you mean? Frank scratched his head. I thought Linda handled almost everything. Ashley smiled tightly. Dad supported them. Frank stared at her. No. He looked around the yard. I mean, after the business almost went under. The conversation stopped. Completely. Ashley frowned. What business? Frank slowly turned toward Mark. You never told her? Mark's face lost what little color remained. Frank looked honestly surprised. I thought everybody knew. Nobody spoke. Frank continued carefully. When Mark nearly lost his company, he looked at me apologetically. Linda kept it alive, Ashley laughed. That's ridiculous. Frank didn't react. I was there. He looked around the gathering. I helped Mark move equipment into storage while creditors were calling. People began listening much more closely. Frank pointed gently toward me. Linda negotiated with suppliers. He looked at Mark. She worked out the IRS payment plan. Another pause. She even refinanced her own house. Ashley stared at her father. Dad? Mark remained silent. Frank wasn't finished. When Mark needed knee surgery, he looked toward another neighbor. Remember? The man nodded. Insurance wouldn't cover everything. Frank smiled sadly. Linda paid that deductible too. Someone quietly whispered, I never knew. Neither had anyone else. Ashley looked completely lost. She turned toward Mark. Tell them. He didn't. Instead, he lowered his eyes. For 17 years, I'd protected his pride. I never corrected people when they assumed he'd rescued himself. I never mentioned the nights we spent balancing overdue invoices. I never told anyone I'd quietly cashed investments to save his business. Not because I wanted credit, because I loved him, Frank sighed. You know what the saddest part is? Nobody answered. He looked directly at Mark. You spent years pretending you rebuilt everything yourself. Then his voice softened. When the truth is, your wife never once made you feel smaller for needing help. The silence that followed felt endless. Ashley suddenly looked at me differently. Not with kindness, with confusion, almost panic, because the story she'd built was collapsing. She tried one last time. So she's still abandoning him? No, the voice came from behind us. Rebecca, I hadn't even realized she'd arrived. She walked calmly across the yard, holding a folder. I stopped by because Linda forgot these. She handed me the folder, then looked politely toward the group. For everyone's peace of mind, she smiled professionally. The court approved a temporary emergency hearing next week. Ashley stiffened. Rebecca continued. Not about dividing property. She looked directly at Mark. Only to determine whether financial authority was improperly exercised. Mark slowly closed his eyes. For the first time, he looked ashamed, not embarrassed, ashamed. Ashley reached for his arm. Dad. He quietly stepped away from her. Just one step. But everyone noticed, including me. As people slowly drifted back toward their conversations, Mark finally walked over. He stopped 6 feet away, close enough to speak, too far to touch. He looked older than he had just 1 week earlier. I didn't think... His voice cracked. I know. No. He shook his head. I really didn't. I waited, maybe for an apology, maybe for an explanation. Instead, he whispered, Ashley said... He couldn't finish. For the first time, I realized something heartbreaking. My husband hadn't just believed lies. He'd needed them to be true. Because believing them allowed him to stop feeling guilty about everything I'd sacrificed for him. Rebecca quietly touched my elbow. We should go. I nodded. As we walked toward the parking area, Rebecca leaned close. Tuesday isn't the final hearing. I know. But it may become the day your husband finally hears the truth. I looked back once. Mark was standing alone beside Frank's old maple tree. Ashley was talking. He wasn't listening anymore. For the first time in months. He was completely alone with his own conscience. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday morning. 6 days, that was all. Not 6 months, not 6 years. Just 6 days that somehow felt longer than our entire marriage. Rebecca warned me not to expect a dramatic courtroom scene. This isn't a divorce trial, she reminded me as we walked through security at the Marion County Superior Court in Indianapolis. It's a temporary hearing. I know. The judge isn't deciding who gets what. I know. Today is about one question. What question? She looked at me. Whether someone crossed a legal line. That sounded simple enough. It wasn't. Courtrooms are much quieter than television makes them seem. No dramatic music, no shouting lawyers, mostly people waiting, papers shuffling, doors opening and closing, the occasional cough. When our case was called, Mark was already seated at the opposite table. Ashley sat beside him. She looked tired, not frightened, just exhausted. For the first time since this all began, she avoided looking directly at me. Mark looked older than I'd ever seen him. His navy blazer hung loosely across his shoulders. He'd lost weight. Or maybe guilt simply makes people appear smaller. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Judge Ellen Brooks looked to be in her late 60s, calm, confident, the kind of woman who had probably heard every family story imaginable. She greeted both attorneys politely. Then the hearing began. Rebecca spoke first. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't attack Mark. She simply built a timeline. Your Honor, Mrs. Harper voluntarily granted her husband access to certain financial accounts over many years for convenience. She placed several exhibits before the court clerk. These authorizations were based upon trust. She paused. Not ownership. Judge Brooks nodded slightly. Rebecca continued. Without notifying Mrs. Harper, access to the household account was altered. She presented printed bank records. Mrs. Harper's debit card was declined while purchasing groceries. She handed another document forward. Following that incident, Mr. Harper and his adult daughter informed Mrs. Harper she would need permission before spending money. Rebecca pressed a button on her tablet. The courtroom speaker quietly played a saved voicemail, Mark's voice. Linda, call me. Then another, Ashley's. Stop making this harder than it has to be. Rebecca didn't linger on them. Instead, she displayed screenshots of text messages. One of them read, Ask permission before you spend another $1. The courtroom became very still. Mark's attorney stood. He wasn't aggressive. In fact, he seemed uncomfortable. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding between spouses regarding budgeting after retirement. Judge Brooks nodded politely. Go on. My client recently retired. Household expenses became a concern. Rebecca didn't interrupt. Neither did I. The attorney continued. There was never any intent to deprive Mrs. Harper of financial security. Judge Brooks looked towards Mark. Mr. Harper, he stood. Yes, Your Honor. I have a few questions. Of course. She glanced down at her notes. When your business experienced severe financial difficulty 5 years ago. Mark swallowed. Did your wife assist you financially? A long pause. Yes. Were those funds gifts? Yes. Did she require your permission before helping you? No. Judge Brooks turned another page. When your tax obligations became overdue, Mark stared at the witness stand. Did your wife negotiate payment arrangements? Yes. Did she ask for repayment? No. Another pause. Judge Brooks folded her hands. Mr. Harper, her voice remained calm. Did your wife ever require your permission before paying your business debts, protecting your credit, or preserving your home? The silence lasted several seconds, long enough for everyone in the courtroom to feel it. Mark tried speaking. Nothing came out. Finally, no, Judge Brooks nodded once. Thank you. Ashley suddenly leaned toward her father's attorney. He whispered something back. She looked frustrated. Then she raised her hand slightly. Your Honor. The judge stopped her immediately. Ms. Harper. Ashley froze. You are not a party to this action. Yes, ma'am. You will remain silent unless directly questioned. Ashley slowly sat back. For the first time, she looked nervous. Rebecca called Nancy Gomez from the bank. Nancy testified by video. She explained exactly what had happened. Mrs. Harper personally requested the revocation of previously granted authorizations. The bank verified her identity. Standard procedures were followed. No confidential information had been disclosed to Mr. Harper. Judge Brooks asked one question. Did the bank freeze Mr. Harper's personal accounts? No, Your Honor. Did Mrs. Harper take funds belonging solely to Mr. Harper? No. So the only changes involved accounts legally owned by Mrs. Harper, or authorizations she voluntarily chose to revoke. Correct. Simple, clear. Impossible to misunderstand. Then Rebecca introduced one final document. The attempted transfer from the joint emergency savings account. $35,000. Time stamped. One day after my debit card had been declined. Judge Brooks looked directly at Mark. Were you aware this transfer was being attempted? Mark hesitated. Yes. Whose idea was it? Another silence. This one felt even heavier. Finally, Ashley suggested moving the money. Did you question why? His voice broke. No, Judge Brooks leaned back in her chair. I appreciate your honesty. Then she spoke carefully. This court is not determining the ultimate division of marital assets today. She looked toward both attorneys. Today's purpose is far narrower. She signed several documents. The temporary order restoring Mrs. Harper's exclusive authority over her separate property is granted. Another signature. The disputed joint savings account shall remain protected pending further proceedings. One more signature. Neither party shall interfere with the other's separately owned financial assets until the matter is fully resolved. She looked at Mark one final time. Marriage requires trust. Then at me. So does financial partnership. Court adjourned. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. No television cameras. Just ordinary people walking down the courthouse steps. Exactly the way real life usually works. Rebecca gathered her briefcase. You did well. I hardly said anything. Sometimes restraint says more than speeches. She was right. Mark slowly walked toward me. Ashley remained several yards behind. Neither of us spoke for a few moments. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were red. I've been trying to remember. What? The last time Ashley and I talked about money without mentioning you. I didn't answer, because I already knew. He continued quietly. I think, somewhere along the way, his voice cracked. I stopped seeing what was actually happening. I believed him. That didn't erase what he'd done. But I believed him. Rebecca gently touched my arm. We should leave. I nodded. As we reached the parking garage, my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. Mark. I almost deleted it. Instead, I pressed play. For several seconds, there was only breathing. Then he quietly said 7 words. I never meant to humiliate you, Linda. The message ended. I stood there staring at my phone. The apology I'd wanted for over a week had finally come. Strangely, it didn't make me feel victorious. It just made me realize how much had already been lost. 3 months later, my divorce was finalized. People often imagine the end of a marriage as one dramatic moment. A slammed door, a signed decree, someone walking away without looking back. The truth was much quieter. The paperwork arrived in a large brown envelope on a Tuesday afternoon. Rebecca called to let me know everything had been filed. The judge signed the settlement this morning. Is that it? She smiled through the phone. That's it. I thanked her, hung up, and sat at my kitchen table. Not the kitchen in the Carmel house. That house had already been sold. This was a smaller townhouse in Fishers, only 15 minutes from Carroll. 2 bedrooms, a tiny patio, enough space for me, no more, no less. I poured myself a cup of coffee and looked around. The place still smelled faintly like fresh paint. Most of the furniture came from my old house. My mother's quilt lay folded neatly across the sofa. My first husband's rocking chair sat beside the window. Some memories deserved to stay. Others had finally been packed away. The settlement surprised a few relatives, not because I won, because I didn't try to punish Mark. Rebecca had asked me the question weeks earlier. What outcome do you actually want? I thought about it for a long time. Then I answered, I want my life back. Not revenge, not humiliation, just peace. The court recognized what had always been true. The house remained mine because I'd purchased it years before our marriage. My parents' trust remained untouched. My retirement account stayed with me. The jointly owned savings account was divided fairly. Mark kept his truck, his tools, and the retirement funds that belonged to him. No one walked away rich. No one walked away ruined. It wasn't a victory, it was a boundary. one that should never have been crossed in the first place. About a month after everything was finalized, Carol convinced me to volunteer with the Hamilton County Senior Resource Center. They're looking for someone to teach budgeting classes. I spent 32 years in HR. Exactly. So every other Wednesday morning, I found myself sitting in a community room with a dozen retirees. Some were recently widowed. Some had adult children helping with finances. Some simply wanted to learn how to avoid scams. One morning, a woman named Denise raised her hand. She looked to be in her 70s. What if the person controlling your money is family? The room became very quiet. I smiled gently. The first thing you do, I paused, is tell someone you trust. She nodded slowly. Then she whispered, I wish I'd done that sooner. After class, she hugged me. I thought I was the only one. I realized then that my story had never been unique. That was the heartbreaking part. I heard about Ashley through mutual friends. She eventually filed for bankruptcy. Apparently, the credit card balances had become impossible to manage after Mark stopped helping her. Oddly enough, I didn't feel satisfied. For weeks, I'd imagined that hearing she'd lost everything would make me feel vindicated. It didn't. Mostly, I felt tired. She'd spent so much energy trying to control money that had never been hers. In the end, she'd lost something far more valuable: her relationship with her father. Mark rented a small apartment on the north side of Indianapolis. Frank checked on him every week. Carol occasionally mentioned how quiet he'd become. He hardly talks anymore. I wasn't surprised. Some lessons don't arrive all at once. They settle in slowly, like winter. One Saturday morning in early spring, my phone rang. It was Mark. I stared at his name for almost a full minute before answering. Hello? Hi. His voice sounded different. Not defeated. Just softer. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. I waited. But would you have coffee with me? I almost said no. Instead, I heard myself ask, when? We met at a small coffee shop in Noblesville, the kind with old wooden floors and homemade cinnamon rolls. He was already there when I arrived, standing, waiting. When he saw me, he smiled politely. Not the easy smile I'd known for years, a nervous one. We ordered coffee, nothing else. For several minutes, we simply watched people come and go. Finally, Mark spoke. I've replayed that morning at Kroger 1,000 times. I looked down at my cup. I wish I could erase it. You can't. I know. He rubbed both hands around his coffee mug. You know what finally hit me? I shook my head. It wasn't Ashley. That surprised me. I made my own choices, he sighed. I kept blaming her because it hurt less than blaming myself. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he quietly continued. When I retired, he searched for the right words. I stopped feeling useful. I listened. You were still solving problems. He smiled sadly. You always had a plan. I'd spent my whole life fixing things. He nodded, and I suddenly couldn't fix anything. Outside the window, a young father helped his little daughter climb out of a pickup truck. Mark watched them. I think I confused being in control with being respected. That sentence stayed with me, because I knew exactly when it had happened. Not when Ashley moved back, not when he retired, long before that, little by little, decision by decision, until one day he'd forgotten that marriage wasn't about keeping score. I took one slow sip of coffee. It was never about $4.17, he nodded. I know. It was about the moment you stopped seeing me as your partner. He looked down. I did. Another long silence. Then he looked back at me. I'm sorry. This time, I believed him completely. Forgiveness, however, isn't the same thing as rebuilding. Some bridges can be repaired. Others become reminders of where not to cross again. I reached across the table, not to hold his hand, just to gently touch it for a second. I hope you find peace, Mark. His eyes filled with tears. You too. I stood first. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't ask for another chance. That told me he'd finally understood. Respect can't be demanded, trust can't be controlled, and love certainly can't survive where permission replaces partnership. A few weeks later, I stopped by that same Kroger on East Main Street. I wasn't thinking about the past, I just needed groceries, milk, bread, bananas. I smiled when I noticed the price of the gallon of milk had gone up. I placed it in my card anyway. The cashier scanned everything. I inserted my card. Approved. She handed me the receipt with an ordinary smile. Have a wonderful day. You too. I walked out into the sunshine carrying one small grocery bag. It looked like the simplest thing in the world. Maybe it was. Looking back now, I realized that morning at the checkout lane didn't end my marriage. It revealed what had already been happening for a long time. Sometimes life doesn't change because of one big moment. Sometimes it changes because an ordinary Tuesday finally shows you the truth you've been trying not to see. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, I hope you chose yourself, or that one day you will. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope our paths cross again soon.